Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today's case, I just want to say this is a really tough case, and researching this literally broke my heart into a million pieces. It's the story of 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez. So just a little disclaimer that I am going to be talking about physical abuse, child abuse and child murder. So just a little warning there. So this is about a little boy that he was just failed by everyone. He was failed massively. So he was 8 years of age. He should have been worrying about what he wanted for his dinner, what was going to happen in school the next day, playing out, watching cartoons, playing video games. But now, the last few months of Gabriel's life, he suffered unimaginable abuse, awful abuse, and there was people outside of the home who knew this, which makes the story even worse because DCFS was contacted. They went to the home and still kept that little boy in the house. So it makes this case so much harder because there was warning signs there. There were reports made. There were people around him who lived outside of the home who were very, very concerned for. There was professionals who were there to protect Gabriel and literally failed this little boy massively. This isn't a story, just a simple story about a little boy who'd been murdered. It's a story of neglect, the warning signs that got missed. It's a story about a mother, her boyfriend, and a child protection agency who all massively failed this little boy. He was 8 years of age. He had a whole massive life spread miles in front of him for it to be cruelly taken away. So, who was Gabriel Fernandez? So, he was 8 years of age and he was born in 2005 in California. And you know, to the people that knew Gabriel wasn't a case file. He wasn't a headline. He was a little boy with his own personality, his own likes, his own dislikes, and he had his own hopes for a lovely future. It's just so hard. This case is literally, it's brutal. Like, I've got an 8-year-old grandson, and a 7-year-old grandson, sorry, and like I keep saying, if he falls over, my heart breaks. So to actually cause this to this 8-year-old boy, how can people be so cruel? But for the first part of Gabriel's life, he did live with relatives and he was a happy little boy. And you will see by the pictures, he is a happy little boy. And that's what I don't understand. These people abuse these kids. Why don't they give them back to the relatives? I know why. They love the power. That for one. But then eventually he did go and live back with his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend. And I hope I say this word wrong, his name wrong. The boyfriend, Isaria, I think. Let me just check. Isaro. Don't know, but I don't care. But that, Aguirre, that's his name. And obviously as soon as he was placed in their care, that's when poor Gabriel's life literally went from happy to, it just went downhill. And it become increasingly dangerous for him. So Gabriel attended Antelope Valley area of Los Angeles County. This is sometimes a lot of these cases that I have researched. I'm very surprised Gabriel went to school because a lot of the time the abusers keep their child home and homeschool. So for him to go to school is very unusual. And when he was at school, people were noticing that things weren't just sitting right. There was something going on with this little boy. And his teacher was one of the main people who actually seen the difference in this child, Jennifer Garcia. Sadly, Gabriel actually said to her, "Is it normal for my mummy to keep hitting me? Like, that literally kills me. Like, that literally makes me want to cry." But thankfully, she did report this to social services, child protection services. She rang the hotline and reported her conversations that she'd had with Gabriel. She could clearly see there was something not right that was going on at home. And obviously that report definitely should have been the start of Gabriel's protection. But unfortunately, it just became a chain of, I don't know, it was just a chain of events that would eventually lead to his death. And Jennifer Garcia, who is Gabriel's teacher, she wasn't the only person who seen these changes in Gabriel and who were concerned for him. So he must have been seeing other family members as well, because they had actually rang up social services. There was reports off multiple people for this little boy. And obviously Child Protection Services became involved. And like I said before, this should have been the ultimate protection for this little boy. Visits were made to the home. Questions were asked. But yet Gabriel remained in this house. Like how? How is he left in this house after them seeing him? Like Pearl, his mum, must have been so good with their answers, because the social workers left Gabriel in the home. And this is the most difficult part of this story to understand, because looking back now, we all know what happens. We all know what happens at the end. So Child Protection Services were going on what knowledge they had. Probably the good knowledge, because like I said, they have multiple reports of worries of relatives as teachers, but they'd rather went off the acknowledgement of Pearl, who was Gabriel's mother. And the problem was that the warning signs were becoming increasingly really serious at this point now. And while all this was going on, while all the reports are going on, and they didn't care, because Gabriel was still going to school with more visible injuries, marks just all over his little body. They didn't even want to hide them. And obviously Jennifer Garcia, she continued to worry about this little boy, because you put yourself in her shoes if you were a teacher and this little boy was coming to your class and you could see him getting weaker and weaker and he was having more visible injuries on him. You're reporting it and nothing is being done. And we've also got to remember here as well, Gabriel wasn't the only child in that house. He had siblings living there. Like, them poor kids, they must have been watching this abuse. They must have been petrified, because I know I would have been. This little boy getting physically abused by his mum and her boyfriend. So what were these other children doing? But anyway, they later became witnesses, and they gave a disturbing testimony. But yeah, Gabriel wasn't just having a difficult childhood. He was being subjected to severe prolonged abuse, and somehow he was still getting sent back to this horror house. Like, I've researched so many stories of child abuse, and social services are involved, child protection services, and they send these children back to their abusers. I don't understand it. There were 4 social workers who were assigned to Gabriel's case. One of them was Stephanie Rodriguez, and her, let me just get this up, her supervisor was Kevin Baum. So there's two social workers, and then another 2 who was Patricia Clement and Gregory Merritt. So that's four people who've gone into that home and looked at this little boy and thought, yeah, he's fine. So they would actually later face charges over Gabriel's death, and rightly so. But it doesn't last, because in 2020 all their charges were all dismissed. And of course DCFS obviously acknowledged this, the court's decision. Of course they did. They got away with it. They let that little boy down, and they were there to protect him. The question surrounding Gabriel's death wasn't simply, did someone know? And how much did people know? And what did these people do with this information? And obviously while all this is still going on, this poor little baby's still getting abused in the home that they're letting him stay. They're not removing him, they've kept him there. And obviously the details that Gabriel's siblings gave to investigators was horrific. So obviously these kids are all still alive. So I just hope and pray that these children become happy and they live a happy life, because that must have been absolutely horrific for them. But obviously, rather than focusing on the horrific details, it's just important to understand what those accounts demonstrated. They demonstrated that Gabriel was living in an environment where he was being repeatedly abused, harmed, just the unimaginable abuse. He was reportedly subjected to physical violence and cruel punishments. His siblings described behaviour that's just not acceptable, and obviously deeply disturbing for these poor kids. And thankfully they later told investigators everything what they knew. So they witnessed everything, so they gave their witness testimonies, which is a little bit of a bonus. Gabriel was 8 years of age. 8. He was still a child, still a baby, still a little tiny boy, at an age where he should have been protected by the adults that were around him. But Gabriel was, instead he was dependent on these adults who were abusing him repeatedly. They were hurting him, they were harming him constantly. And that's what makes the intervention failures so painful to examine. Because Gabriel was only 8, he didn't have the power to just get up and leave. Like an adult, if it'd be hard. He had nowhere to go. He was 8 years of age. That was his home. That was his mum. He couldn't just get up and leave. He needed other people to recognise what was happening, who could save him. And he needed an adult to believe him. And he did. He had his teacher, Jennifer Garcia. He needed somebody to say this child is not safe. And he did. Again, Jennifer Garcia rang up Child Protection Services. So did family members. So by May 2013, Gabriel's condition became catastrophic. And finally, on May 23rd, 2013, Gabriel's mother rang 911 to inform them that her son, 8 years of age, was unresponsive. The paramedics arrived and he was rushed off to hospital. He suffered catastrophic injuries. There was just nothing that doctors could do for him. But they did. They fought to save this little boy, but he was just in too much. His body had just been through so much that he couldn't take anymore. And he actually was declared brain dead. And his family faced an unbearable decision, which was horrific, because I don't know how. But on May 24th, 2013, Gabriel died. And Gabriel's death obviously became a criminal investigation. And obviously, of course it did, because these injuries just don't happen on their own, do they? There's always a perpetrator. Why is this perpetrator always the mother? Like, I get so angry. Like, these people do not deserve to own a dog. Never mind a child. And his mum, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isora? Let me think. Isaro. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but I don't care. Really don't care. They were both arrested. They were actually arrested while he was still on life support, so the charges weren't murder at this point. But as soon as Gabriel died, the investigation turned to murder, so they were actually charged with murder at this point. So the evidence that the investigators would eventually see, it just painted a picture of prolonged abuse to poor little 8-year-old Gabriel. And honestly, like, it's so sad. It's how can you do this to a child? And then obviously prosecutors would eventually argue that Gabriel's death wasn't an isolated incident. This was actually a culmination of months and months of abuse. And then finally, the investigators turned their attention towards the agencies that had previously been out to see Gabriel while he was still alive at the home. The police wanted to know how many reports had been made, who had received them, who had ordered, and what had been investigated. And the main question is, why was Gabriel remained in this home? Why wasn't he removed and put with family members who he lived with for the first part of his life? And these questions would become the centre of this legal investigation. So Asara Aguirre eventually faced trial for Gabriel's murder. The prosecutors presented evidence describing the horrific abuse of Gabriel that Gabriel endured. Witnesses testified. Gabriel's siblings all gave evidence, and the jury heard the heartbreaking circumstances that he endured for the last few months of his life. And the prosecution argued that Aguirre had literally deliberately participated in this abuse. And in November 2017, I don't even know how to say his name. I don't want to say his name. It feels like crap coming out my mouth. But the mum's boyfriend, actually, he was found guilty of murder, first degree, and he was sentenced to death. Now, I don't know if I've spoken about the death sentence on any of the videos, but I would rather him be in the general population, because while he's in the general population, he's mixing with people who don't like child killers. So there's a chance he can get beat up, like Ian Huntley, for instance, who killed Jessica and Holly Wells. So he got beat up pretty much all the time, because we don't have the death sentence here in the UK. So they just get given life here. But they are with the general population, which is always good in my book, because they're with people who don't like child murders. So they get beat up all the time. And in the end, Ian Huntley did die. So go check out my other video about that, the Soham murders. But obviously with him, Aguirre getting death, he'll now be living in a little cell on his own. No worries about people attacking him. So I do agree with the death sentence, I really do. But then I don't, because I'd rather him be in the general population getting beat up all the time. And literally, his case would become one of the most notorious child murder cases in California. But obviously the story wasn't finished. Gabriel's mother, if you can call her that, because she's not a mother, she's a monster. She was actually charged with first degree murder as well. So she actually took a plea deal. So unlike Aguirre, she didn't go to trial. So she took a plea deal to avoid the death sentence. And she also pleaded guilty to Gabriel's murder, and she was convicted of first degree murder. And she admitted having the involvement of Gabriel's death. And she's a mother. How? These people should be given a hysterectomy as soon as they kill one child. Hysterectomy straight away. And she's been put in prison. She was in prison for life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is good, because she's going to be in the general population, I hope. And I hope she's getting beat up every single day of her life. I hope she's getting the same abuse what she's done to Gabriel. So for Gabriel's extended family, these sentences, it can't undo what happened. Yeah, they're behind bars, but it's not going to bring him back, is it? The sentence isn't going to give them another birthday with Gabriel, another Christmas with Gabriel. Summers, his teacher adored him. These sentences are not going to bring all that back. And that sentence, it's not gonna answer the questions what everybody's asking. Why? Just why? Just why wasn't he saved? Why? I just don't understand. There was all these people who could have protected him on the outside of his home, and they failed him massively. And after Gabriel's murder, the attention turned towards the social workers who had been involved in his case, and 4 social workers actually became involved, and they got charged alongside Pearl, and they got charged with the involvement of this case. They were charged, not charged with murder, but they were charged with criminal findings. They faced criminal charges. It wasn't murder, but it was criminal charges. So it was Stephanie Rodriguez, Patricia Clement, Kevin Baum, and Gregory Merritt. What a lovely gang of people you are. And prosecutors accused them of failing Gabriel for not properly protecting this gorgeous little boy. And may I add, falsifying records. So which means they probably did see the bruises on him, but they wrote down, nope, nothing happening here, he's all good. Like, this case was extraordinary because the criminal prosecution of child protections of the child protection workers over a child's death is extremely unusual for this area, and the prosecutors argued that the workers minimised what they saw when they went in that house, and they just minimised evidence of the abuse. But obviously the defence defended these monsters, and they argued that the social worker, they did not have custody or control over Gabriel, so therefore could not be held responsible for what happened. But hang on, these people went in this house, they seen this little boy being abused, they had reports made by teachers, outside family members, all report on what went on. But yeah, they couldn't be held responsible for they couldn't be held for anything because, like I said, they had no legal obligation to step in because they had no custody over Gabriel. They're trying to say they've got no responsibility over the parents' actions. Come on. I'm not a social worker, but if I knew a little boy was getting attacked and brutally abused, I think and I was a social worker, it's common knowledge. You remove that child. And the case did go through the courts. They did get arrested. They did get questioned. And then they did go to court. And then in January 2020, an applicant of the courts actually ruled that the workers could not be prosecuted in the way prosecutors had attempted. How sad. How very sad. Like, these people need another job. They need to go and work in Walmart or in Asda or wherever, Aldi. They should not be around children. So obviously all their charges were all dropped. So they weren't getting charged with nothing. And DCFS, obviously we're delighted with this outcome. That their 4 social workers all got off with this charge. Give them a pat on the back. They were all charged, and then the charges were dismissed. And that distinction is extremely important, because Gabriel's story should not be changed to fit a more dramatic narrative. The social workers weren't charged with the murder of Gabriel. Now I get that, but they let him down. Their knowledge of being social workers should have seen what his teacher was seeing. And clearly, they should have got charged with something. Because, like I said before, falsifying records. So what the hell have they wrote down after being at this house? And this is where Gabriel's story becomes bigger than just one family. Because after Gabriel's death, Los Angeles examined the failures within the child protection services. A Blue Ribbon Commission was established following Gabriel's death to examine the child protection problems and recount and recommend changes to their system. And actually, Los Angeles Child Protection Services later acknowledged that Gabriel's death exposed weakness, let me say, weakness in child protection. And the county did report, actually, it reported reforms including the hiring of thousands of additional social workers. Why now? Why do it now? Why wait for a child to die? Why wait? Why this should have been done before, not after little Gabriel's death. And the idea about hiring more social workers is so one social worker isn't doing 10, 20, 30 caseloads a day, rather than one social worker with one case, and obviously improve supervision. But reforms after the child's death can never, ever, ever change what happened to that child. And literally that is the painful truth of it. A system can change its policies, it can hire more workers, it can change procedures, it can hold more meetings, and it can create more safeguarding. But clearly Gabriel doesn't get to benefit from any of these changes. And that literally hurts my heart. And there is one question, even to this day, is could Gabriel have been saved? I know we can't rewrite history. I know it's happened. It can't be changed. It can't be undone, unfortunately. We cannot know exactly just what would have happened if a particular decision had been different. Just one decision might have been different, and that could have saved him. And obviously there were warning signs that he was getting abused. We know that people were really, really concerned for Gabriel. We know that reports were made, and we know social workers became involved. And unfortunately, we do know that Gabriel was eventually killed in that home, from which he really desperately needed protection. And I think this is why his case, a decade later on, it's still affecting people, because he could have been saved. He wasn't invisible. People could clearly see he was being physically abused. You could see it. People spoke to him. He spoke to his teacher. Like I said earlier, he did say to his teacher, "Is it normal for my mummy to hit me?" What? How sad. People worried about him. Reports were made. But yeah, he still died in that home, in that house. And when we tell true crime stories, there is always a danger that we can become so focused on the murder, the investigation, the murder, the courtroom, the evidence, the perpetrators. And although we don't forget about the person, but in a way, because all what I've just said, you're focused around, you kind of do forget about the main character in this story, if you can call it that, Gabriel. And Gabriel deserves to be remembered. And this is why I'm telling this story today, because I want to tell his story. I want his story out there. I want people to remember this little boy. He needs to be remembered more so than the circumstances of his death. He was just a little boy. A son, a brother, a grandson, a nephew, and most of all, a little boy who deserved to have love. He deserved to be safe in his own home, feel safe in his own home. He deserved to grow up. He deserved birthdays. He deserved teenage years. He deserved adulthood. He deserved a future. And it just breaks my heart. Literally every time I see that little face with a smile. He deserved a future. Gabriel was only 8 when his life was cruelly taken. And no child should ever, ever, ever have to depend on luck to survive in their own home. Gabriel's story is one of the most heartbreaking, devastating child murders cases in modern American history at the minute. But perhaps the most important thing that we can take from this just isn't simply who hurt him. It's actually what we can learn from the warning signs that came before his death. You know, if a child's saying they're being hurt, listen. If a teacher rings up social services to say this isn't right about this child, then listen. If a neighbour becomes concerned, listen. Not hard, listen. And if a child starts acting differently, again, listen. It's not hard. And if something just doesn't feel right, just don't assume that somebody else will report it. And sit back and think, oh, someone else will report it. Report it yourself. Because obviously sometimes there just isn't a second chance. Gabriel should still be here. He's 8 years of age. He should have had his whole life mapped out in front of him. And obviously, although we can't change what happened to him, the most important thing we can do is make sure that his name is remembered. Gabriel Fernandez. And not just how he died. Like, no. We remember the little boy. And also because he was a little boy who deserved to live. So, please rest in paradise, Gabriel. I hope his siblings are all doing okay. I really, really wish the best for his siblings. And I just wish Gabriel had have had that chance as well. You really did deserve so much more. So that brings this story to an end. This poor little boy, 8 years of age. You know, it's just so sad. Anyway, well, thank you for watching. And if you did like watching this video, please subscribe, because I will be uploading more true crime once or twice a week maybe. And always please remember, behind every true crime is a real person, a real family, and most importantly, a real life that mattered. Again, so thank you all for listening in, and I'll see you on my next video. If there is a crime that you want me to cover, comment and I'll do research and I'll do my best to do it justice. That's all I ever want to do, is do these stories justice. So yeah, if you like to subscribe and comment if you want to see me do any if you want me to cover any other cases. Thank you all. Bye.